Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, what is it today? It is July 2nd, 2019. Yes, I'm sorry. I almost forgot what the date was. It's the second birthday, happy birthday, to the issue of homelessness. Yes, it is now 2 years old, and the president has just become aware of it. I think this is approximately the craziest or dumbest thing that he has done this week. It is Tuesday, so I think I'm fairly safe in making that call. We are getting ready, of course, to visit again with Ian Reifowitz, who I don't think I had scheduled to discuss the president's dementia at this point, although we could, of course, discuss the still developing plans for rolling tanks and the military through the streets of Washington, D.C. right in front of everybody on July 4th, and it's A-OK with everyone. That's also a possibility for discussion. We can, of course, discuss that on our own, as between us, if we would rather, let's say, turn our attention to the release of Ian's new book, which we discussed not that long ago, actually, and we can get a little update and see how things are going, whether or not the way is still paved for Trump, according to the Tribalization of Politics, Ian's new book, How Rush Limbaugh's race-baiting rhetoric on the Obama presidency paved the way for Trump. I think he's still there, and so I think so far the thesis has held. We'll take a look inside and discuss things both directly and peripherally related to the topic of the book, as you can't keep our eyes entirely off of the spectacle that is Donald Trump at the moment. In the opening, if you haven't seen it, then I don't know where you've been, but maybe you went to sleep early. But Tucker Carlson apparently had an interview with Donald Trump, and one of the things that I haven't seen discussed all that much with it about it is that I guess the interview was conducted while they were overseas in Japan, and I didn't know that Tucker Carlson had traveled with him to Japan, which is weird in itself, I guess, given that, once again, the president then went on to Korea and into North Korea, which was sort of supposed to be a significant and major historical moment in the national security annals of the United States. As it happens, I mean, there wasn't much to it, but we noticed that the national security advisor was not there, literally sent to Mongolia instead. Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, however, on hand with fashion accessories for the event, and that is extremely important. By the way, it's no joke that MAGA Twitter is openly discussing, they're actually openly rebutting any suggestion that Ivanka didn't belong there by saying this is a successful businesswoman who runs many, many companies. She is a philanthropist, a businesswoman, a senior White House advisor, which they say without any sense of shame at all. I mean, she's an advisor who doesn't advise on anything and isn't listened to, advisor to her father, who somehow, cheated his way into the White House. It's nearly not that much of an accomplishment, but ordinarily we do say senior White House advisor, that's a very serious person. But they're very seriously discussing how she will be the Republican nominee for president in 2024. And we're not kidding. I mean, everyone on our side, I think, has been saying, eye roll. They're paving the way for a political career for Ivanka. They're openly discussing and celebrating it as though it were a done deal, and we're just catching up on that one. Anyway, so there she was, and there Jared was. For some reason, I don't know whether, I'm curious as to whether the president, a little curious, I guess, because who cares what an idiot without any grounding in reality, thinks about whether or not who he's inviting with him on these trips. I'm a little curious, though, about whether he says, Jared, I need you to come on this trip, or whether he says, Ivanka, we're going on a trip, and she says, I'm bringing Jared. And he says, all right. I don't really know how the dynamic works. Anyway, along with him, he brought, I guess, Tucker Carlson. I don't know whether he paid Tucker his way or not, and certainly his media outfit could have sent him along as a, if not a pool reporter, then to say, all right, well, we're going to get an exclusive interview while we're overseas, so it's worth going. But I just note that, for the record, remember a million years ago / 1 or 2 weeks ago when we were going to attack Iran overnight, and he was all set to go. The bombers were in the air. Now, of course, the bombers are in Washington, D.C. for the parade. But the bombers were in the air, and I called them back 10 minutes before I decided to kill everybody in Iran, or at least 150 of them. But the bombers weren't in the air, and they weren't almost, the whole works. The White House changed its story about 19 times about what had happened, but that it eventually came out that there was every likelihood that the president had seen Tucker Carlson on television, on his telly, saying that this attack would be a mistake, and so suddenly the attack is called off. So now he goes to the G20, visits in Korea as well, and Tucker Carlson has come along with him. I don't know. I mean, the National Security Advisor, go to Mongolia. Tucker Carlson, come with me. Anyway, as it happens, they sat down for an interview, and perhaps the most startling excerpt of it was circulated last night, commented upon eventually by Daniel Dale, who summarizes it by noting that Tucker asks Trump why American cities are filthy, whereas those in Japan are not, apparently. And they have people urinating on the streets. Trump says it's a phenomenon that started 2 years ago. Yeah, homelessness and, stuff happening in the cities. Daniel Dale, of course, says the whole answer is something, and it really is. The excerpt, the screen grab excerpt that he has included with that, is the transcript of most of the video excerpt exchange that was circulating yesterday. Tucker Carlson saying, you come to where we... should I just play it? I mean, we might as well just... maybe we run the audio. I don't know, see if we can get away with that. Did I put it away? Here it is. The bulk of the exchanges is here in audio, and, I see. Now I recall why I have it, why I don't play those clips all that often. I think we have to open it up on the other computer. But if we monkey around with the volume here, we can just sort of play it through the microphone. Let's run it.
Where we are now, Osaka or Tokyo, and the cities are clean. There's no graffiti. No one going to the bathroom on the street. You don't see.
It's a little low in volume, I think. Maybe we anyway. Maybe instead of we can avoid the risk of copyright infringement, actually, and we'll just discuss the transcript, which is probably easier to deal with. Carlson saying, "You come to where we are now, Osaka or Tokyo. Where are they? Are they Osaka or Tokyo? I don't know. Either one. The Japanese emperor assured me I could call it either Osaka and Tokyo, whatever we prefer. No graffiti, no one going to the bathroom on the street. You don't see junkies," he says. Trump says, "It's very nice, isn't it? Very different from our cities." Interesting answer here to Trump. Yep, well, no, some of our cities. And then what? Carlson interrupts and says, some of our cities, but New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, they've got a major problem with, and I guess that's the dog whistle for them. New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, that means I'm criticizing liberals. This is their fault. Trump says, it's very sad. Blah, 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 back and forth. Here's the bit that's surprising everybody, I guess. Trump says, it's a phenomena that started 2 years ago. It's disgraceful. I'm gonna maybe, and I'm looking at it very seriously. And by the way, I love that. He throws the crutch in. He is 1 second into the the lengthy answer here, and he goes to I'm looking at it very seriously. What are you looking at? Okay, at least he says very seriously instead of very strongly. I just want to note for the record, very strongly is not a way that you can look at things. So let's get that out of the way. Anyway, he goes on to say nothing, essentially. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, he hints, he comes right out and says it's a phenomenon that started 2 years ago, which I think is very seriously indicative of his disorientation and dementia. I mean, there isn't anybody in the world who thinks homelessness or the urban phenomena of graffiti or homelessness or drug addiction started 2 years ago, which of course would be on his watch. But I also think that 2 years ago is his reflexive move to blame something on Obama, having forgotten that he's now been in office for more than 2 years. 2.5 years going on 3, and he hasn't adjusted that yet. 2 years ago still means I blame Obama for this. We're looking very seriously because you can't do that. That's it. That's what's going on. And he goes on to say that it's embarrassing to him in a way when foreign leaders come to Washington. He wants to make sure that they don't see that, and he'll do anything he can to hide that because that's indicative of some kind of failure. What an interesting reaction, though, to homelessness. You can't do that. Well, you can, and they have, and they've been doing it and been doing it for a long, long time, and you don't care. Now, I guess you could ask yourself, is it possible that he's lived so sheltered a life that he's never seen it? Is it possible that he's only saying it's 2 years old because he wants to blame it on Obama? Is he so mentally ill that he has no idea? I was saying last night and again this morning, this is the point in the interview where he's saying, it just happened 2 years ago. You can't do that, blah, blah, blah. And it only happens, by the way, he goes on to say it happens in San Francisco and Los Angeles and New York because they're sanctuary cities and they're run by liberals. That's what he wants to get around to saying. P.S. He drops a hint at the end, by the way, that there's going to be yet another roundup in the middle of imprisoning all of the migrants and separating the children from the families and leaving them in filthy conditions in concentration camps. There's another roundup on the way. And it's those other yucky people, no real Americans, like the homeless. That's what's in the offing here. But his insistence that it is a phenomenon that started around 2 years ago is the point at which a clinician, a mental health clinician, let's say, if they were giving the interview rather than it being Tucker Carlson, would start asking the questions of, okay, I think we have indicia of dementia here. Do you know where you are right now? Do you know what this facility is? Can you tell me today's date? Perhaps who is the president of the United States? That was another good suggestion somebody made in our Twitter discussion of it. Yeah, a classic, to be sure, but it does present something of a madness of King George problem because he's allegedly president of the United States. We don't know why or precisely how, but that's certainly, that's what he thinks anyway. So I found that rather fascinating, and it is, again, at the end that he says it's a liberal problem and liberals' fault for having all of this, and hinting once again at another roundup. So it's a potent mix that we're looking at here on the cusp of July 4th, just in case you were wondering how progress was going on getting those tanks to Washington, D.C., the tanks that the Pentagon says shouldn't be there and that the streets can't support. He has, I guess the current status is that we still don't know where those tanks are going to go. The president has assured us that they will be stationed, as he says, outside of the celebrations that he has planned on top of the ones that were already planned for July 4th in Washington, D.C. And for a while, it was looking like, well into the afternoon hours of July 1st, that there were not yet any tanks designated to show up, and they weren't sure how they were going to get them there. Plus, of course, he thought they were Sherman tanks, which they're not. But apparently, late-breaking news reported by the AP last night, there were, in fact, tanks spotted on rail cars arriving in a rail yard in Washington, D.C. How they're going to get them to whichever spots they claim are designated for this display, we don't yet know. But somebody gave up some tanks. There was a little bit of discussion about where were the nearest tanks, where, if you wanted to bring tanks in, where would they come from? And they managed to figure out where the nearest federally controlled Abrams tanks were, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. These, however, came up from Georgia. Was it Fort Benning in Georgia that shipped these up? I don't think that's the important point, but we'll put that on hold for just a moment and head back and discuss that and what it means. Although we'll open up the opportunity for Ian to speak to it, but we'll give him a call. This is the agreed upon time, so let's do a little of the ringy dingy game and see if this works, and we can pick up with Ian and talk about paving the way strongly enough to support 60-ton tanks if we can. Oh, this is a pleasant musical interlude. There we are. Hi, Ian. How you doing? Happy July.
How are you?
I'm fine. Getting ready for the influx of military material to the national capital area in advance of July 4th, which is totally normal, and everyone should not worry.
I'm not worried. No, nothing can go wrong with that.
No. Not even just the basic issue of 60-ton tanks rolling over our water mains. It's not a big deal. Look away. This is a very interesting development, I guess. Just another one of those things that the temptation is to say, well, it's only for a little while or a specific purpose. And there's something so very patriotic about military equipment being brandished right in the Capitol by somebody who doesn't know what year it is. That we say, well, go away next week. Don't make a big deal of it. Don't make waves. But, I'm keeping one eye on it anyway.
I guess I just had a mental image in my mind of Animal House and the the
Yes.
parade down the streets of Faber. I mean, they didn't have any tanks, but
Yeah, close,
oh, good Lord! And when Niedermeyer starts shooting. I guess this is really fair, to suggest that Trump is really President Niedermeyer, but it's sort of fun, right?
Yeah, or he may be President Bluto. It could be that he pops out of the tank in pirate garb at some point.
And if you remember the closing lines on the screen say that it was Senator and Mrs.
Yes.
Blutarski,
Right. Yeah, they
guess,
missed by that much.
Trump's
Could be, right?
my age.
And I believe he sexually assaults someone right then and there as well, drives off with them. She then succumbs to Stockholm Syndrome and agrees to become Mrs. Senator. So
I believe that's a basic plot line, yes.
right. I think we got it right. And Animal House is a little cringy, 35, 45, 50 years later, whatever it is. How old is Animal House? My goodness.
Sure.
All right. Well, that's not happened yet. We have 2 days to celebrate freedom before Trump celebrates it for you. God damn it. So let's see if you can get it in your way. So we have checked in. It's been a little while since we checked in, and on the book is still relatively new in its launch. Is it now out and distributed? Are you getting? Are they just piling George Soros money on you now, or what?
Oh, well, maybe not George Soros money. I'd be fine with George Jefferson money. So the book has been out. Actually,
Yes.
it's. I'm sorry, that was pretty good, actually.
I like that one.
It's unclear because Amazon has two different dates, but
Yes,
one was
right.
June 18 and one was June 25. So either way, the book is definitely out.
No doubt.
It's the tribalization of politics, how Rush Limbaugh's race-baiting rhetoric on the Obama presidency paved the way for Trump. I want to thank you again for having me on a few weeks ago to talk about it. That was a lot of fun. And
sure.
Yeah, so far I guess it's going fine.
Yeah.
I don't really have any way of knowing that for sure, but
you just will say it.
Yeah, the vibes are good. How's
yes.
that?
All right, and they kept you busy, and you're doing plenty of interviews and promotion for it, so that's good news.
Yeah, and I'll mention for folks listening that if anybody's going to be at Netroots Nation, which I hope I'll see many of you there, I will have a book event, book signing, whatever you want to call it. It's on the Thursday, the 11th of July, and it will be at 12:30, wherever the book events are. And I remember seeing that I'm sandwiched between two really good author events, one before and one after me, neither of who I can remember who they are right now, but I was pretty excited about it.
That sounds well. It's a good place to be then. So Thursday, right on day one.
Yes.
And although now there's plenty of events on Wednesday these days. It has been the case for a while, but so official opening day Thursday. There are a lot of good books, Netroots related books and authors, of course, out there with new material. So it happens to be a special one this Thursday. Coming up in like how long? A week, 2?
9 days.
9 days.
12:30. Hope to see lots of folks there.
Excellent. And well, let's see. I also have handy, thank you very much, your Sunday piece. I don't know whether we should jump. How do you want to begin today? Is there something that's on your mind the same way the tanks are on mine?
You're the driver of this train, my
really?
friend.
Oh, okay. Well, geez. All right. Leave it up to me then. Let's see. I guess one of the things that struck me in the last week or so with the G20 trip, plus, of course, the continuing atrocities, not only, I guess everybody says, on the border. It has to do with border issues, but people are being detained all over the country, of course, and they ship them around from any number of locations. But it struck me thinking about which one is it? Let me open up the book here. 4th chapter here of the theme. You have I guess 6 chapters and different themes in the book of how exactly, specific examples, I guess, a taxonomy of how Rush Limbaugh's rhetoric paves the way for Trump. There's blackening the radical secret Muslim president first, inventing the anti-American president. We talked a lot about, I think, those first ones. Hating cops but loving Black Lives Matter, number 3. Obama, the apologizer and appeaser, the 4th one, came to mind to me as Trump held his, I guess, agreement-free and concessions from North Korea free trip to the DMZ and met Kim Jong-un at the border and did his photo op trot, I think 10 paces into I'm surprised he didn't use a golf cart for that one, but I don't know if they could have gotten it over that granite barrier. But I was thinking about as everyone else was, of course, how a year ago, maybe, and certainly 2 years ago, back when homelessness first started, we were at each other's throats virtually, and that the big contention, the big point of contention at that moment was the Otto Warmbier abduction, and of course, his later death, and then having Trump show up glad-handing, I mean, he's already done that a number of times, but one more time, and staging a big propaganda coup for Kim with certainly no agreement on the table, no nothing, and in fact, the North Koreans agreeing to do less than they ever have by way of denuclearization, and thinking of all the energy spent on the right screaming about Obama appeasing everyone and apologizing for America, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, now crickets. And people dug up all kinds of great old tweets from people who've been hanging around the conservative movement, such as it is for a long time. insisting that Obama was going to be bowing and scraping to Kim Jong-un any moment, and here it was Trump.
Right, and I saw that great collection of clips from Fox News, where Hannity would be, was saying, talking about Obama and then talking about Trump, and in addition to his hair being a little whiter, the level of hypocrisy was just incredibly evident. Whatever Obama was doing was appeasing or acting weak or whatever, and then Trump, who has literally accomplished nothing, is projecting strength. Right? I mean, what has really Trump done? Trump created a crisis, created all this war tension, and then takes credit for that tension not breaking out into actual combat. But meanwhile, he has literally achieved nothing in terms of moving North Korea anywhere closer to any kind of denuclearization. Obviously, we'll know more. If these talks go anywhere, and if they do, then great. That's good for America. It's good for the world. But the hypocrisy in the right-wing media is absurd. The celebration of Trumpian greatness over zero achievement. Meanwhile, what real diplomats have said is that an appearance with the President of the United States is supposed to be a reward for concessions.
Right.
Instead, we put the cart before the horse.
Yes, and so, I guess we can't really anticipate any concessions anytime soon. There haven't been any along the way either, and many of the experts contend that the Koreans actually have just simply continued their program all along, so it's less than no progress. It may even be negative progress. Let's take a quick 2-minute break, regroup. I know it's an early one. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We are joined, if you are just joining us now, you wouldn't be Ian Reifowitz if you were just joining us now, because he's still here from our previous segment, calling in on his handy Obama phone, which I only remind you because as I was ticking off the chapter names in the book, I stopped at chapter 4 just for a quick discussion on Obama, the apologizer and appeaser, versus Donald Trump, the actual apologizer and appeaser, who was just appeasing Kim Jong-un in the DMZ, which I don't think anybody knows for sure whether Trump... He used the term DMZ, but we're not certain that he knows what it stands for, and we think he may think it's the gossip show. But number 5 chapter, the 5th chapter, Obama's entire economic program is reparations. That's a direct quote from Rush Limbaugh himself. That's just the chapter title here. Of course, that very much back in the discussion, but it was a big deal way back when, and everything was a handout to, I guess they just put it pretty bluntly, right? Obama was black, and he was just going to give stuff away. All of Obama supporters wanted free stuff, and they were getting it. Obama phones were being handed out on the streets, as I recall. Were there other concessions and giveaways being alleged at the time?
I saw some people wearing T-shirts that said, "I voted for Obama, and all I got was this lousy Obama phone." T-shirt.
Yeah, I recall those, and not so much the phones. But
oh God, no, you don't want to know. I mean, that quote. He talked about reparations a lot, and I don't want to go too far off where we were, but this the one thing that stands out for me is when Limbaugh was criticizing, the proposed Obamacare program, he said something essentially like, there will be black healthcare bureaucrats deciding whether or not you get healthcare. And if you support Republicans, which is of course essentially code for if you're white, but if you support Republicans, or you're going to be more likely to be denied by these black bureaucrats who see healthcare as a part of their reparations policy.
Yeah, and an early preview into how Trump would govern, in the sense that everything is projection, and whereas nobody previously would ever have imagined really overtly running a government program by looking to use it to penalize average voters who happen to have voted for the other side, that was Trump's plan all along. And I sometimes can't decide whether I think it was projection or they just figured that Democrats were doing it because that was their thinking. I would definitely punish my political enemies, so they must be doing that now. I'm not certain where the projection starts, or whether they just imagined that they would do it as retribution, or whether, those guys stole my idea or what. But
well, and I mean, there's so much projection. I mean, the whole voter fraud push from Republicans is about projection, and there's a ton of stuff in the book about Limbaugh talking about Acorn stealing votes and Obama essentially being Acorn and using Chicago thug tactics. Well, of course, they're the ones who have been, at least in recent years, stealing, violating laws to steal elections. We saw that in, I believe it was North Carolina's 9th district, where the election was actually overturned. And the whole voter suppression campaign, again, is a deflection. They lie about voter fraud in order to get laws passed that end up suppressing the vote. I mean, clearly that's projection. And even on immigration, this whole, their whole thing, their whole argument, or one of their main arguments, is that Democrats want to bring in lots of immigrants and put people on a path to legalization because that'll bring in more Democratic voters. So for them, but it's really their approach to immigration and immigrants that's about voters. I mean, look at their approach to the census, their attempt to manipulate the census.
Yes.
That is so obviously, even from their own documents, an attempt to swing elections in their favor by blocking or reducing the count of immigrants. It's all about projection. I mean, I talk about the voting rights stuff. I talk about the immigration stuff. So it's
all in there.
It's all in there, boys and girls. And
True.
And trans people. It's all in there. Everybody is included in my audience, I hope.
Yes. Well, there's something for everyone, and every piece of this puzzle is projected. It's true, or predicted here. The 6th and final chapter is it's entitled, in scare quotes here, the word illegal immigrants and the president who loved them. The final of the 6 specific examples of Limbaugh's race baiting rhetoric here, that, as you say, paved the way for Trump, and of course became the negative image of what they thought Obama was doing. All the love he was showering on so-called illegal immigrants, they would reflect back as cruelty and hate, and they're doing a fairly decent job at that, and blackening the name of the United States in the eyes of the world with their concentration camps. And here we are on our own side, busy fighting about whether or not to use those words. But you have a piece from last Sunday which sort of ties that together with your previous comments about the Republican drive to use immigration, and really any issue that they can, and tie it to another of their projectionist fantasies about elections being stolen.
Well, right. I mean, look, if you're going to give the Republicans credit for one thing, they understand and know how to bend the rules to help them win future elections, so that they can keep bending future rules to help keep them winning future elections. I mean, they're laser focused on that. and they have, manipulated gerrymandering, manipulated elections where they've controlled states after 2010. Democrats did it in a couple of states as well, but they were pretty much decimated in 2010. So Republicans are, we're now in 2020 fighting on an electoral map that gives Republicans a much better chance than they should have if the electoral districts for state legislative office and also for Congress overall were drawn in a nonpartisan way. But they were not drawn that way. I mean, and they are open about it. I highlight this quote from a Republican named David Lewis in North Carolina, who played, who was one of the leaders in the process there in gerrymandering that state districts. He's talking about congressional districts. Remember, North Carolina is a state where, roughly speaking, the vote for Congress overall, which covers the whole state, has been about 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans, maybe 1 or 2 points in the Republicans' favor here and there. Mm-hmm. Lewis said, quote, "I propose that we draw the maps to give a partisan advantage to 10 Republicans and 3 Democrats because I do not believe it's possible to draw a map with 11 Republicans and 2 Democrats." It doesn't matter. I don't care how many people come out and vote. I want there to be 10 and 3. If I could make it 11 and 2, I would. Yeah. But I can't, so we're going to make it 10 and 3. Those are not elections. Those are not elections. And I said in the article, I really don't understand how this is different from the elections in the old Soviet Union. I came across the statistic that's probably not too surprising, that up until 1984, 100% of the votes in all the legislative elections in the Soviet Union went to one party, the communists. Yes. Well, now, obviously, right, this is not exactly the same thing, but if you're going to say it's going to be 10 and 3, pretty much, unless there's some kind of black swan event or some lightning strikes, it's going to be 10-3. Well, you know what? That's pretty much not an election. Yeah, it's not. And when you look at Wisconsin, where the Democrats won more votes in 2018 statewide for the state legislature, if not, then it was almost exactly 50-50. I'm not 100% sure I remember that right. Either way, it was right around 50-50. But Republicans got 2/3 of the seats, or approximately 2/3 of the seats in the legislature. That's not how elections are supposed to work. You can argue about the constitutionality one way or the other, but Justice Elena Kagan had a brilliant dissent, which I go through in some detail, and where she said this is ridiculous, essentially that the court is abdicating its responsibility by claiming that that there's no way to come up with a good, fair, objective system, even though lower courts have come up with exactly that system. Essentially she says that the court has abandoned its duty, and that's ridiculous. She said the practices challenged in these cases imperil our system of government. Part of the court's role in that system is to defend its foundations. None is more important than free and fair elections, and I think she's 100% right. Oh yeah, and I up until a few years ago, I think everybody even thought, well, in their own way, even, we disagree about the methodology, but surely even Republicans believe in free and fair elections. And in the past couple of years, we've been forced to acknowledge that they simply don't. I know what you were pointing out with the election results. That's been a hot circular on Twitter for the past 24 to 48 hours. Someone's got this graphic, although I don't think that they credited it properly. Although, let's see, is it? I've seen it circulated by Aaron Weiner, senior editor at Mother Jones, and I'm not certain where he took the graphic from, and I don't think it identifies it. But the source of the information is identified, so at least we can check that source. But this is a little chart, which he said nothing really encapsulates the effects of gerrymandering as what's illustrated in this chart. They've got the 2018 results of the state legislative elections in 2018 by vote share as among Democrats and Republicans statewide. And then the results. What is the partisan split of the state legislature? So in Michigan, I think the mildest, perhaps, of
these disparities where Democrats received 52% of the vote for the legislative contest statewide, 52-47 over Republicans. The Michigan state legislature, however, is somehow still majority Republican by 53-47, almost exactly the opposite of how the statewide vote came out. North Carolina, which you mentioned, also reversed its results. 51-48 was the margin by which Democrats carried the statewide vote, but it is a 54-56 advantage to Republicans in the state legislature nonetheless. From there, the disparities only grow. In Ohio, the Republicans actually won, but won the barest of majorities. Again, a 51-48 split for Republicans in Ohio, who instead enjoy a 62-38 advantage in the state legislature. And Wisconsin, the most egregious of all, where Democrats carried the state 53-45, and yet suffer under a 64-36 Republican advantage in the state legislature. I mean, and I guess I'll also throw in that this all runs in the background behind, oh my God, these guys are crazy. The president himself is particularly crazy. No telling what they're going to do at any moment. We must impeach them. And we are told, no, too radical. Fix it at the ballot box. Here's the ballot box. Doesn't appear to be working in some major states and jurisdictions across the country.
No, that's exactly right. And, yes, Democrats have done some gerrymandering as well. And you can look at Maryland, where they've gerrymandered. I think all the U.S. House seats but one are Democratic. Mm-hmm. But it's an overwhelmingly Democratic state.
Yes.
And it certainly is possible in a state where the popular vote is overwhelmingly for Democrats, that Democrats would win in each district pretty much no matter how the districts are drawn. That's very, but, still there should be competitive elections and they should be drawn in the right way. But that's very different. If you're looking at states that are essentially divided down the middle popular vote, where, as you mentioned, Democrats even win the popular vote for the legislature most of the time, and that the other party has solid, strong majorities in the state legislature, which essentially, given our system, means that they're the only ones who can pass any laws. It only, that's how it works. The loser has won in terms of everything that matters, which is who controls the legislative process, and there are appointments that are made by the legislature, or that the legislature has a role to play, and having a majority there is everything. So one of the other things I said in the article in the Post is that Democrats can make the argument against gerrymandering part of their election campaigns, and a number of our presidential nominees have done this. Michael Bennet has a good plan about banning gerrymandering and requiring fair maps. Elizabeth Warren has, unsurprisingly, a very comprehensive plan to make elections fairer, both talking about gerrymandering, but also a number of other things about protecting voter rights and having federally guaranteed voting processes. But this is something Democrats can run on, because it allows Democrats to run on democracy and paint the other side as being against democracy. That's a pretty powerful thing. Yes, it doesn't put food on anybody's table. It can't be the whole of a campaign. But there's going to be a point in any election, whether it's for Congress or the presidency, where a Democrat can say, we want fair elections in a debate. Yeah. Your side doesn't. Defend that.
Yeah.
How's Donald Trump going to defend gerrymandering? I mean, seriously. I mean, come on. There literally is no defense. What are you going to say? Yes, we believe that as Republicans, we should make sure that Republicans win even when we lose. I mean, this is not a winning message for independent voters, right? And it's an example of where Democrats can do the right thing on principle and also appeal to voters outside their base, right? Because that's the whole, one of the things we constantly talk about is how do we appeal to voters outside our base without abandoning our principles? And we shouldn't have to abandon our principles, because I think our principles have a lot of appeal on whether it's economic issues or many other issues. But here's another perfect example of being able to fight for democracy in a way that is, in a sense, almost anti-partisan, saying, we Democrats are against gerrymandering even when we have the power to do it. And certainly, the federal running for federal office, they can make that argument because it's something that will appeal to these middle of the road nonpartisan voters, because it's it shows that we as Democrats believe more in democracy than our own direct victories, and the other side believes the opposite.
Yeah, if you're talking to actual, honest to God, independent or swing voters, you would assume that would appeal to them. I guess so long as they're not, they don't fall victim to the essentially the lies. I mean, I figure if Trump were asked a question like that, if he decides to show up for any of the debates, that's also an open question at this point. Certainly with his base, he could easily justify just skipping the debates entirely. But I don't know how well it would work with everybody else, but we tend to forget things pretty quickly. There would be a brief period of press outrage, and then what? Lining up for exclusive interviews, I assume, and asking all the questions they didn't get to ask in the debate. Trump, I think, is... well, he's uniquely positioned, perhaps, but I don't know. I wonder how deep the ability runs in the Republican Party to say, to answer with the same projection in these debates. We're not the ones who are against democracy. You are. Well, what's your proof of that? I don't know, but we're going to commercial. And that's, I guess that works for the hardcore base and probably no one else. But I could easily envision Republicans in televised debates standing there and doing it and paying relatively, low prices, let's say, on that. Losing the swing votes early, maybe even losing their seats, if underlying all of this debate about whether or not we're having free and fair elections, we're also actually counting the votes in a real and substantial manner. I don't know. I mean, maybe it will no longer matter one day. And certainly the longer we ignore this problem, the more likely it is that we'll just be able to slowly move over into, the number of votes cast doesn't really matter. We just saw it happen statewide. I mean, we have the excuse of the legislative district boundaries for explaining away, well, how is it that 52% of the people voted for Democrats, but they lost? Well, we have these, it's the gerrymandering that makes it possible. And once that excuse is acceptable, then I guess, I don't know, how long until, we got rid of legislative districts and we now have just at-large seats, but you still lose because that's what we say. I don't know. It's all very confusing. And people want to be able to watch football or something, and I don't know. I'm not certain how that comes out in debates, but it's certainly worth, while we have the opportunity, pointing out, we're into democracy and allowing for self-determination and valuing the votes of American citizens, and you're not.
It's a pretty powerful argument. The thing about gerrymandering is there's a point where the votes can overwhelm it. If you've set it up so that you've got, X number of safe Republican districts, but you have a true wave, then those safe districts aren't safe, and you can flip a good chunk of them.
Yes.
It's not easy. And that's what, I start the article by talking about a catch-22, right? The elections are unfair. In order to change the unfairness, you have to run in elections according to the unfair rules. That's very, really a problem. But certainly Democrats in 2008 at the federal level had sweeping victories. And if you can do that again, you can pass some federal laws. And you can pass some federal laws that undo all of this stuff at the state level, and then you can do it you can do it one state at a time as well. And what's the alternative? I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's incredibly frustrating to think that we live in a democracy that each side is supposed to have an equal chance. And I know each side, it's a two-party system. I don't want to go too far off there. Yes, there could be multiple parties, but for now, it's a two-party system. Each side is supposed to have an equal chance. But one side really has kind of like a 60% chance, and the other side only has a 40% chance, even when all is equal. Now, that it's not it's not France before the French Revolution in levels of undemocratic practices, but it's not fully fair elections. So what do? You have one tied behind your back. Well, then you go out and you punch as hard as you can electorally, even with one hand tied behind your back, and you try your best to win. And I do think that we can defeat Donald Trump, and I do think we can defeat Mitch McConnell and his Senate Republicans. And if we don't, then we'll fall back to another position, and we'll go from there. And we'll have to talk about what happens next. But for now, we've got to give it all we have, because we're not only obviously fighting to win the election so that we can work on issues like gerrymandering. We have to do work on all the other issues as well. But gerrymandering is a structural issue that if we can change it, will make the whole process fairer for decades to come, and allow us to be able to do the other things on racial justice, on economic opportunity and economic, greater economic equality and all the other things. But we can't do those things if we don't win elections in the first place.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's as depressing as it is. It's not meant to say, well, there's really nothing you can do, so forget about it. We're certainly at a disadvantage, and they pile on top of it. It's not just the gerrymandering and giving ourselves or giving Democrats Republicans a 60-40 advantage, let's say, right out of the gate. But on top of that, a sizable number of traditionally Democratic voters are disadvantaged in terms of whether or not they even get a ballot to cast, or have to stand in line for several hours in order to cast it, or have their votes lost because the elections infrastructure in their part of the state, or in districts that are identifiable demographically as having a large number of potential Democratic voters. Some of those ballots get lost on the way to the tabulation center, or we sent you broken voting machines, or whatever it is. We all know, I guess, what the barriers are, but there really is no alternative absent, the most radical ideas that we all like to at least think we can avoid with democratic response. There's no alternative but going out there and fighting, knowing, we have one arm tied behind our back. We're just going to have to fight that much harder. Some of the motivators in that fight are reminding everybody, yes, we see what the disadvantages are, and we would like to see them removed. And if you would like to see them removed too, fight one more time. But I guess at some point there are going to be some people who say, I don't feel like I'm getting the results out of this. But that's politics. It's been the case all the time. I don't mean to diminish what's being done, but the alternative is, I guess, surrender. So no one's up for that. Right.
And I believe in democracy as a process, even if we don't get the outcome we want, as long as it's a free and fair election and a process where everybody has equal access. That's important. I mean, and I don't even know that Republicans respect democracy as a process. If you respect the democracy as a process, how would you support this kind of mass gerrymandering? I mean, and look at their position on the Electoral College. I mean, David, let me ask you: do you really believe that Republicans, if they had lost in 2000 and in 2016, the Electoral College, after winning the popular vote, would be out there defending on some kind of bogus principle about the distribution of votes in urban and rural, whatever, that they would be defending the Electoral College versus the popular vote? I can't imagine that for a second. I believe that the popular vote should elect the president, and I would say that, and I'm telling you right now, I would say that even if Bush and Gore had flipped and Trump and Hillary had flipped and we were winning in the Electoral College and losing the popular vote, I would still believe that the popular vote is the way to elect a president, not this crazy Electoral College that is supposed to do whatever it is that Republicans say it's going to do. Because the principle is there, and I believe in principles, and I believe in the process of democracy. And it's sad to say, but example after example has demonstrated to me that Republicans do not.
Yeah. Well, it's not difficult to imagine. I think probably the most common reaction to the first introduction of the Electoral College concept in civics classes across the country as I think it's always presented the same way. I know you guys can't believe this, but did you know that you don't actually vote for president, and the popular vote doesn't actually dictate the result? And most kids, I guess we don't care because they're kids or whatever, but they're shocked. And whether you learn it as a kid or as an adult, people are surprised to find that out. And, it's explained away, and certainly you're given the theory that the founders propounded for establishing the Electoral College, most of which has fallen apart in the interim. But, the whole process of teaching the Electoral College to first-timers is letting them know the concept you have of democracy, it's turned upside down here in this particular instance. And it can be manipulated, but there's no chance, though, that Republicans would be arguing in favor of it unless they were winning, because it's easy to imagine them simply saying, that's very Archie Bunker-ish and easy to understand. This doesn't make any goddamn sense. Let's get rid of it. So
right.
I think it can happen for kids. It can happen for them.
Their principles follow from the results that they want,
yes,
rather than the other way around.
Sure, and it's easy to believe that would continue. As a matter of fact, I did have sitting by here, Michael Tomasky wrote on this over the weekend in the New York Times on the same subject. Do the Republicans even believe in democracy anymore? It's an open question. That's the title of his opinion piece. We won't necessarily thumb all the way through it, but I thought I'd back you up there with that and say, well, clearly you're not alone in asking that question, and even very serious people in very serious newspapers, even if they're not, accurate or correct all the time, are asking the same questions, and they mean it. It's not just a joke. We're going to take another 1-minute break here. I don't know if you can hang on during the break or not, but if you need to scoot, we can do it. We can wrap up.
Good, David. I'm good.
Good. Excellent. Well, if you're good, I'm good. Then we're both good, and we'll both be back after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Quick 1-minute break, and we're back, and we found the Tomasky piece here. I haven't had a chance to look through it myself yet, but I imagine that it's, we'll find a lot that's familiar to nod at. And he's not the first to arrive at this conclusion, and you can see why. Let's see, what we were just discussing during the break, you had a thematic tie from this piece to an earlier discussion about the Republican, let's say, flexibility on principle.
Right. Well, we started the show, we started my segment at least talking about North Korea and how essentially Republicans were criticizing Obama for doing one thing and praising Trump for essentially doing the same thing. You had that great quote from Ms. Schlapp saying, "Oh, look, Obama's shaking Raul Castro's hand. Whose hand is he going to shake next? Kim Jong-un's." And of course, look at Trump now shaking Kim Jong-un, and Ms. Schlapp works for him in the White House. And it goes down to the same thing with gerrymandering and the Electoral College. It's not that something is right or wrong. It's just that it's wrong when a Democrat like Obama does it, and that same thing is right when a Republican like Trump does it. And there essentially are no principles. There's just partisan advantage. And in terms of the gerrymandering, I took a quick look during the break, very quick, at the Tomasky piece, and he talks about. He says, well, we can't say that we live in an authoritarian state, but he came across a book by Stephen Levitsky and another author, and Levitsky is the co-author of How Democracies Die with Daniel Ziblatt, came out last year, which is a very important book. And this 2010 book was called Competitive Authoritarianism, and he said that's really what we live in. With Republicans acting the way they do with gerrymandering and voter suppression, that we live in a competitive a country that you could characterize as competitive authoritarianism, and he defines it as he quotes the definition from Levitsky as such, They are, quote, civilian regimes in which formal democratic institutions exist and are widely viewed as the primary means of gaining power, but in which incumbents' abuse of the state places them at a significant advantage vis-a-vis their opponents, end quote. And then Tomasky adds, sound like anyone you know.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty much hitting the nail on the head. That's a new term for me. Competitive authoritarianism?
Right, right, really? Okay. Right. And there's another, he quotes another line. He says, legislative control is critical in competitive authoritarian regimes, end quote. And the authors list 4 reasons why, and then Tomasky adds, you can bet Mitch McConnell knows every one of those reasons and probably a couple more.
Yeah. Well, it's important to them to be able to legalize their activities sometimes after the fact and sometimes before.
Right. But, to add, Tomasky says he doesn't think we're all the way there yet, but we may well be on the way, and it's abundantly clear who wants to take us there. So I want to make sure we get the Tomasky thing right. But and I think that makes a lot of sense. This idea of competitive authoritarianism, and maybe we're not all the way there yet, but if Republicans have their way, if they keep winning elections when they lose the vote, just think about where we would be as a country right now if Al Gore. Even if Al Gore got one term and lost, and then you had George W. Bush, let's say afterwards, and then you had Barack Obama, and then you had Hillary Clinton, and even if Hillary Clinton only would have ended up with one term, whatever. Let's just say that instead of having 3 terms of Republicans and 2 terms of Democrats since 2000, let's just say we had 3 terms of Democrats and 2 terms of Republicans in some alternate universe. The Supreme Court would almost certainly now be majority Democratic.
Yes.
So think about from the gerrymandering case to all the other things that we would be at. Just in terms of process, not even in terms of actual rights like reproductive rights that would be in much less danger. Citizens United might have been decided in a different way. So maybe even just by Gore having been in position to appoint a couple of seats as opposed to George W. Bush, some of the elections would have been freer in the years afterwards. So maybe there wouldn't have been the same kind of scenario in 2016. Or maybe the state legislatures wouldn't have been as Republican after 2010, and they wouldn't have been able to gerrymander the hell out of them. I mean, who knows? Each of these events builds on itself. And the Republicans have managed to draw inside straight after inside straight. But not only do they win those pots, when they win those pots, they change the rules to make it easier to win the next pot.
Yeah, I can hear the frustration building. I like the punctuation there. But yeah, that's absolutely the case. And you had me thinking during that entire segment. I'm thinking about the now infamous opening, I guess, scenes of Fahrenheit 9/11, which of course focuses on the Electoral College ballot counts in the House of Representatives with Al Gore presiding, and people pleading their case with respect to the Florida vote and the recount, and won't you please do something, and can't you? I'm thinking about Al Gore standing there and illustrating this principle in reverse, that when Democrats hold the gavel, literally, in that case, Greg and I discussed that point all the time, that who, depending on who's holding the gavel, can change the outcome of the substantive reality. Even the results of the vote can be changed by the person with the gavel, because that's the way we've set up our institutions. There was that moment there where it could have gone the other way very easily, but for the humility and adherence to principle of the Democrat in charge at that moment. I couldn't possibly bring the power of the state to bear to my own personal advantage, even though there's a tremendous amount on the line in the daily lives of hundreds of millions of people are in the balance here. But it will look like I was bringing state power to bear for my own personal advantage, and I can't bear that, and Democrats won't stand for it. In a democratic system, we just adhere to principle that strongly. I instead surrender, which tripped the whole rest of the system forever.
Right, and I'm not saying Democrats have always been the angels. I don't have any historical part. JFK might have stolen the election. Lyndon Johnson might have stolen his first election to the Senate in 1948. That's why it was called Landslide Lyndon, for those of you who read the Robert Caro books. But we're talking about now in the modern day.
Yes.
We all know about Merrick Garland. Some people might remember that there was talk that there was a loophole there in the Merrick Garland incident. There was a point on January 3rd, 2017, there was a point where the old Senate class, their electoral mandate from 6 years earlier had expired, but the new Senate class elected in 2016 had not yet been sworn in. And in that interim, Democrats, there were only 66 senators, or 67, because one third are elected every 2 years. There were only 66 or 67 Democrats, but with Joe Biden presiding, those 66 those 66 senators had a Democratic majority, and there was some talk that loophole could have been exploited. Joe Biden could have gavelled that Senate, confirmed Merrick Garland, and then F.U. Trump and F.U. Mitch McConnell. I don't even think that was ever even seriously considered, because it would have been a violation of the spirit of the democracy. Does it matter that Mitch McConnell violated that spirit with what he did to deny Merrick Garland a hearing, let alone a vote? No, that we don't believe in two wrongs make a right. And you know what? I can even hear if there are Republicans, if Mitch McConnell were listening to you and me right now, in a fantasy land, let's assume that Mitch McConnell is listening to us.
Yeah, your wife's a pirate. Sorry.
Right. I could see him just snickering. Those weaklings, principle, schmincipal, it's all about winning. You know what? I believe that democracy matters, and even if I want to believe that democracy matters so much that the candidates in the party that stands with those principles will win in the end. And you can say that's weakness, or you can say that that's naive. But frankly, I'm not going to betray my principles, and I'm not going to believe that two wrongs make a right. That doesn't mean we don't fight hard, and it doesn't mean you don't press the advantage, by pushing for laws when you can pass them. But you don't change the rules and break the rules so that you have more power. That's just wrong, and that is, and to go back to Tomasky, that is a step towards this competitive authoritarianism.
Well, we didn't go for the fix on Garland. That's true. I invented that. that was my thing.
Was it?
Yeah, but
good job.
Yeah, thanks very much. Nobody listened to me, and I could understand why. I mean, I anticipated no real resonance for the suggestion, because it would have been shocking, I think, to people to see that happen. But so what? Honestly, at this point, I mean, in terms of it being shocking, I don't know if I don't know how if it were up to me to have decided the thing, would I? I'm not even sure to this day whether I would have said, yeah, you know what, we should do that, because it is a huge departure from the way people think things are supposed to work. But before then and since then, we've had enormous departures every day, and we literally cannot keep track of them. We're just simply not interested. Everyone thinks that would have been just a total body blow to I guess, democratic expectations. But we were there because there had just been one for a year. And, you say, well, that's unfair. We can't do that because, the elections have been held, and the results of the election are, for whatever reason, that there should be a Republican majority in the Senate right now, and it's only not because you're delaying their swearing in for partisan trickery. But, it's another way of looking at it, which is to say, well, we did have an election, and Democrats did win, and more people voted for Democrats in the Senate, for one thing. For another, even if you don't buy that, at the moment, these people are duly elected, and these people are awaiting the ratification of their election. But at the moment, everybody who votes on this nomination for Merrick Garland has been duly elected. This is the Vice President of the United States. He is the President of the Senate. And this is happening because the president of the United States, who's still president at the moment because he's president until January 20th, nominated this man for the Supreme Court, and the Senate owes him their advice and consent. And this is the currently constituted Senate. You know, kind of a freaky situation, but so is having 7 million more votes for a Democratic majority in the Senate, but having a Republican majority instead. Weird things happen in this democracy. But, you know, just as it would have been shocking to overturn the election results or Florida's then current election results in 2000 for Al Gore to have ruled that way in, you know, to the advantage of Al Gore and how that might have looked. But it would have it was legit and could have been done and was within our power, and we turned away from it. And we're doing the same now. I guess no surprise, and I don't want to make people, you know, angry at our institutional Democrats any more so than they are already, or than is necessary to keep them going from day to day. But you know, the same theory obtains. Maybe this is how I can assure myself of the rightness of the cause in the Merrick Garland trick. We face the same situation right now, and people are backing away from even saying they'll consider a hearing about whether or not impeachment would be warranted for fear of looking like they're doing something shocking and outside the system, even though it's a constitutional process. And in addition to, you were counting up the number of Republican presidencies versus Democratic presidencies over the last couple of years. Think about the record on impeachment. There haven't been who has crossed the line more often and been more deserving of impeachment when they've held the White House, even if you expand beyond Trump. Impeachment isn't a tool that's been used on Republicans, period. Hasn't been done. All of history. Never happened. The only people getting impeached somehow are Democrats. But if we were to impeach a Republican, that would be tit for tat. It would be 2-1, but apparently their count is we'd be the ones breaking the rules.
Right. I mean, the idea that, you know, impeachment is not only is it within the bounds of expressly within the bounds of the Constitution, it wouldn't even advantage Democrats in a partisan way because you'd still have a Republican, Mike Pence, as president. So the idea, we have to make sure that we don't just avoid things that are shocking. It's one, it's one thing to say we're not going to change the rules. It's another thing to say we're not going to use the rules that already exist and use them in a way that they're explicitly prescribed to us in the Constitution. Yeah, certainly. And we're not even talking about Democrats voting to remove him from office. You and I are just talking about voting to open an impeachment inquiry. So, I mean, for the reasons I'm sure you've discussed many times, I mean, Robert Mueller has given you an impeachment referral mentioning specifically, I believe it's 10 or 12 incidents of likely obstruction of justice. I mean, if that's not enough to open an impeachment inquiry, I don't know what is.
Yeah, well, we may never find out because apparently no one at the moment. We're only slowly progressing towards let's see, are we getting near a third of, I guess we're right around a third of the Democratic House caucus willing to say, we should look into the possibility of looking into the possibility. Right. Slowly but surely. But, and we're bumping up against another couple of possible outrageous violations of everything, in addition to the ones we've already had daily. Trump now in interviews, I guess, what? Is he tweeting it? Is he saying in interviews, toying with the idea of, well, maybe the constitutionally mandated census doesn't happen. Because if it's not done my way, we might find out that there are many, many more people than we can gerrymander away effectively. And also, I'd like to be able to use the census in some way as an excuse for deporting people somehow. I'm not sure how I'm going to do that exactly. But he's now saying, I've lost the court case on including the citizenship question in the census, and I think it's just a matter of time until I can manipulate things such that a court allows it. So what about delaying the census until I win? And I don't know how we're going to deal with that one. Everyone is telling me that, once again, well, you can't delay it. It says right in the Constitution when it has to happen. And, of course, the question is, okay, right. So it's constitutionally mandated in the sense that if it doesn't happen, if he says, I'm not going to allow it, so I'm going to call out the army to arrest all the census takers, what do we do? What happens at that point? And the answer is, I don't know. There's no process for that either. And, of course, arresting the president or whatever the hell he would come up with. Well, that would be too shocking. More shocking even, I guess, than not having a census because you don't feel like it. And so, I don't know. I guess we just won't have a census.
Well, and then I was also thinking along the same lines that Trump has on occasion, more than once, tweeted about him serving more than 8 years.
Yes, right.
As president. And to bring it back to some of the things we were talking about earlier, I might have cut some of these mentions from the book because I had more than things that I could use. But Limbaugh, on a number of occasions, without any prompting from Obama, warned that Obama is probably thinking about going beyond 2016 and going beyond 2 terms and breaking the Constitution and serving as some kind of dictator. Literally with no evidence that Obama had done anything to or said anything along those lines. Meanwhile, Trump is actually saying those things right now. And unless I've missed it, Limbaugh has not sounded the alarm along those lines. I'd be shocked, frankly, if he didn't say something supportive along the lines of, well, yeah, the Mueller probe did cost Trump 2 years, so why shouldn't he? I can't say that I've seen him say that. My research ended with the end of the Trump, with the end of the Obama administration, thankfully for me.
Yes.
But the point is, Limbaugh, was up in arms about Obama and going beyond 2 terms with no evidence, and meanwhile Trump is giving you evidence right now, whether it's going beyond 2 terms or ignoring the Constitution on the census, that really the Constitution for him is just another piece of paper. And if he was in a bathroom and it was the only thing there, you know what he'd use it for.
Yes. Well, yeah, you can't tell. And sometimes what he says is dismissed as well. I'm just kidding, or I'm just joking. I'm just musing. I'm thinking out loud. And, he just does that continually until he says, no, I'm not. I mean, we never know with this guy. I mean, honestly, if you're unsure about how to take this as evidence, no one would really say this sort of thing seriously and mean it. I don't know. This particular president, for instance, thinks the F-35 fighter jet is invisible. And we can't nail him down on that. I know people have been saying, he's talking about radar. No one will ask him that because I think they're afraid of the results. But we have that. We have, he now thinks homelessness began 2 years ago. Earlier this week, I think, he said that the reason his meeting with Kim Jong-un was so historic was that President Obama spent his 8 years begging every day for a meeting with Kim Jong-un, who would refuse consistently to meet with President Obama, but not me because he likes me. We have a great relationship. The lies just pile up. And you can't be sure whether he's telling us. He said he wanted tanks for July 4th, and everybody said that's ridiculous. He admitted right away, I only want it because I saw it when I was in France. And I said, I want that thing. I want that toy. And the Pentagon said no, and it can't be done. And he said, I'm the commander-in-chief, and I bet I can order it. And it took him 2 years, but the tanks are there. So I don't know.
I guess if we're going to go back to Animal House, it just reminds me of the great speech where Blutarsky says, "Did we surrender when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor?" And Otter says, "Never mind, the Germans? Never mind, he's on a roll." Right.
And I guess if it had been written now, and when they do the gritty reboot of Animal House, instead instead of having that discussion, they'll get on their phones and tweet out, "The Germans bombed Pearl Harbor." MAGA. Hashtag.
Exactly. Oh no. Oh God. Talk about a cringing over Animal House.
Now we can make it for
everybody.
Right. Yeah. All right. So now I reimagine it as the launch of Trumpism. But I mean, I don't know what to consider a serious thing or not. Speaking of, I guess, things that make it difficult figure out whether things are serious or not. I see reported in The Hill, Trump looking very strongly, again, that's not a way you can look at things, looking very strongly at delaying census. That's the reporting. It was from yesterday, of course, so no new developments on that front. But we don't know what to make of that because, again, I hear something, another angle on all of this. Our political press is built for accommodating nonsense like this, even when it comes from the president, as opposed to sounding the alarm when you say things like this, which is, I think, what the First Amendment press was supposed to be built for. They instead say either, well, maybe he's kidding, or maybe it's okay to look at it because, after all, he's just consulting with constitutional scholars and lawyers, and they will convince him that it is impossible to do this, and he'll be dissuaded from doing so. And so it's not a sign of instability or unseriousness about the Constitution or dictatorial tendencies. It's simply that's what constitutional law is about, and you weigh things like this and talk to experts. So we'll just report this sort of calmly, and, maybe there'll be a census and maybe there won't.
Right. Well, you have to remember that Donald Trump really, really likes Andrew Jackson, and he's talked about Andrew Jackson a lot. And one of the things Andrew Jackson did was he ignored a decision by the Supreme Court about the constitutionality of one of his actions, I believe relating to moving Cherokees out of Georgia. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that's but what I definitely know is what he said was Justice Marshall has issued his decision. Now let's see him enforce it.
Yes.
And, that's maybe exactly where Trump is going on the census. And I'm not saying that without evidence. We're saying it because it was reported that he's considering going there, as you just said. This is the danger in having somebody who doesn't care about process, who doesn't care about the system, who doesn't care about the basic principles of what it means to have a constitutional democracy. He doesn't care.
Yeah. Well, that's all an annoyance to him, and it's sort of been an aspect of populism in a way, or at least reactionary right-wing populism. And I'm sure you could come up with examples of people who've gone too far on the other side too. But this sort of, like, I shorthanded as Archie Bunker type reaction. This doesn't make sense. This thing doesn't make sense. So why don't we just not do it? Or we sometimes say on the show, why don't you just ism? That you say, it's annoying that, for instance, I guess people like Trump would say, you've arrested the right guy for the crime and he gets off on a technicality. We should get rid of that technicality, or just kill him anyway. Or DNA evidence has proven that the Central Park Five couldn't possibly have perpetrated this attack, but they're pretty black, so we should call for their execution anyhow. This is sort of the thing he does, and of course, it's supposed to be difficult to overcome that kind of obvious reactionary stupidity at the ballot box and win the presidency, but I guess if you kind of cheat, then it's fine and you can take care of it that way. But this was never supposed to be in the offing. Our system just isn't designed for it. Our political press doesn't know what to do with it. And, I mean, here we are. I don't need to retell that story. I guess we'll reiterate it, nail it down again.
Right. And we have a conservative media that serves a chunk of the country that serves up propaganda. I mean, literally Trump propaganda. I mean, I'm sure you've mentioned it before, but there was the woman in Wisconsin who went to the rally of Michigan, I believe, went to the rally of Representative Justin Amash. It's the only Republican who's come out for impeachment, and Representative Amash told what was in the Mueller report and explained his decision. And the woman was interviewed after, and she said, "Boy, I'd never heard any of that. I never heard anything about the Mueller report saying anything negative about Trump. I only heard that the Mueller report had vindicated Trump, and I got that because I listen only to conservative media." And that is Orwellian. That is Orwellian. That's more than being in a bubble. That's being in an enclosed environment of lies.
Yes.
And I don't know how these people sit there and say to themselves, we know we are going to lie to our people. We know we are going to lie to our audience, but we don't care. Because as with gerrymandering, as with the Electoral College, as with whether a president should or shouldn't shake the hand of Kim Jong-un, it's not about the principle. It's only about the results.
I don't know what it is unless it's the dreaming of a big payday at some point. I can't think of anything other than that. It's just got to be the raw power accumulation. Well, we've got to take our third and final break, and we can, well, I want to keep you from work, but certainly hang on for just a second and we'll at least wrap up, if not finish the show out. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I realize now, as we're discussing things, as it would be sort of a hard break, but I bet we can tie it back pretty quickly to what we've been discussing. But I have a number of reminders here from people listening to the show, and I'm aware of the story, as many of you have been for a day or two now, but there's been no acknowledgement yet on the show, and I suppose now's as good a time as any of ProPublica's reporting on their discovery of the a Facebook group maintained among Border Patrol agents where, similar to things we've seen before and people getting themselves in trouble with electronic communications, saying the quiet part out loud on places where it's discoverable, like Facebook or various other forums. But I think everybody has heard the news by now, and I guess it's part and parcel of the abandonment of principle in a way. It's part of that discussion that it's clear that they obviously fear no consequences from this, and I guess they've been brought up in a culture in the Border Patrol in the last couple of years where this is par for the course, and they clearly don't fear being singled out for any sort of punishment by the Trump administration for saying these sorts of things out loud. And it's the most vile stuff you could possibly imagine. And if you can't imagine it, ProPublica will describe it to you in vivid detail. But I thought I ought to bring that up, and well, even if it's a complete departure from the discussion of the book, get your comment on it.
Well, I mean, I don't have much to say other than that it's disgusting,
yes, but,
and it's not surprising.
Yeah.
I mean, going back even to Limbaugh, this is what the right wing has done for a long time: is they've created this climate of fear around immigrants and crime by lying about undocumented immigrants creating more of a danger than they really do. I mean, we've seen data finally in the last year or so that has confirmed that undocumented immigrants do not commit crimes at a lower rate than the native born. Which, if you think about what crime rate means, it means, and the data shows this also, that if you live in an area that has more undocumented immigrants, you're safer, even as safe and possibly even based on the data safer than if you live in an area with a lower rate of undocumented immigrants, because more undocumented immigrants means a lower crime rate than living among the native born. But they're out there pounding, pounding this rhetoric of crime and immigration. Trump has done it right when he came into office. 4 days after he came into office, he created this voice, this VOICE office, which is just disgusting. And all it exists to do is spread information about immigrants and undocumented immigrants who have committed crimes. Of course, some people commit crimes, but the use of this to create fear, I think, is the kind of thing that feeds exactly what you saw on these Facebook groups, which is fear leading to anger, leading to hate, leading to really disgusting language and rhetoric.
It's the feeling of impunity in attacking not only just migrants in general, but it's also, of course, very much racially targeted. That happens to be the demographic makeup of at least southern border immigration folks. But so I guess it lends itself to that. But there's clearly something gone awry. I guess you could always imagine that Border Patrol agents, sort of I guess we have to acknowledge the seamy underside of operations there, probably for a long time, when their job is patrolling the southern border, that they're going to fall prey to this sort of easy targeting. But this may be beyond anything we imagined them saying out loud, and I think that's part of the what we've perceived as the emboldening of racist feeling and thought. What are you going to do? You have a racist president who does this every day. It's going to seep down to the lower ranks. But I suspect it was probably there even before he got here. It's only his open discussion of his own racism and everyone else's that has, I guess, allowed it to fester to the point that when we finally discovered their Facebook page, it would be that difficult to even discuss on network television and describe accurately. You have to kind of see it for yourself. Very disturbing.
Right. I just remember this was even early. I think it was in 2016, in the fall of 2016. There were a couple of young guys in Boston who beat up somebody on the street who they targeted as a Latino immigrant, and they were screaming epithets and talking about Trump when they did it.
Oh, yes.
And they were inspired by Trump. It was in the Boston Globe. It goes way back. These guards are just talking; they're not beating anybody up, and that's obviously something different.
Not on Facebook, they're not. I guess they might actually be.
Yeah, as far as we know, right? But the sentiments are there, and Trump has unleashed them. And one of the things I wrote about a couple of weeks ago is that when you're talking about campaigns, what Democrats can do is point out that when Republicans are hyping up these fears about immigrants, what they're really doing is trying to distract you, the sort of middle-class white voter, let's say a working-class white voter. They're trying to distract you from the fact that their economic policies aren't helping you. Right? We're on your side on this sort of tribal stuff, but look over here. Don't look at the tax bill in front of you. Don't look at the exploding federal deficit in front of you, which is exploding because all the money is being sucked up the economic ladder. Just look over here at the thing we're screaming about. Yeah,
and it's right. That goes way back, and as a tactic, right? So they won't notice that you're picking their pocket if you can give them somebody to point at and say that person's worse than me.
Right. That's the old Lyndon Johnson quote. I use that with my students. I talk about that with students all the time. It's an important way of understanding modern conservatism, and it's not just Donald Trump. Lyndon Johnson said that, and back in 1964, and some of the people he was saying that about were then conservative Democrats, but most of those conservative Democrats became Republicans. Strom Thurmond went way back in 64, did it, and Limbaugh has helped a lot more of these conservative, racially resentful whites to become Republicans. In fact, if you look at data from the time Limbaugh emerged on the national scene in the late 80s, racially resentful whites were roughly equally distributed between the parties. And up through 2016, the data that's done every couple of years that tracks this shows essentially that the racially resentful white Democrats have all become Republicans, and the amount of white racial resentment among Democrats has dropped significantly, even as overall, white racial resentment in the country has held roughly at a steady level. It's dropped a bit, but there's been a sorting. There's been a sorting, and Republicans are now the party of racially resentful whites. That doesn't mean every Republican is a racist, but if you're a racist and you're white, you're almost certainly going to be a Republican. There was something I remember on the what was it, Janine Garofalo or somebody said, not every Republican is a racist, but all the racists are Republicans.
Right. Yes. Not all Republicans are quadrilaterals, but we understand that I remember that from geometry. Right? They're not all quadrilaterals or squares, but all squares are quadrilaterals. Okay. Same thing with the racists and Republicans.
Who said you can't learn some math here at Coast Radio?
We'll throw that in there, or at least some vocabulary, if not actual math. It struck me also pretty recently that in thinking about this sorting, I guess, and the Democrats who became Republicans and the 1964 turning point, and as I think said yesterday, if it's 1964, all these people who became Republicans, and if you were not representing a constituency where the racism was the feature, or at least the racial resentment was the feature, or if it was something you had to cover up in some way. Well, yeah, sure. Racial resentment seems to be driving this conversion from Democrat to Republican, but I represent a northern constituency, and I just want you to know I'm really becoming a Republican because of their tough stance on Russia. Okay, that's gone too. Just thought I'd throw that one out there. If you had on your, as I put it yesterday, if you had on your 1964 political bingo card that there wouldn't be a single Republican vote in Congress to protect the integrity of American elections against Russian meddling, call me. You win. Great job. I can't believe you predicted that one, but that's where we are. So even that excuse now is gone, and I guess you're down to the racial resentment, and, they're just going to have to, I guess, I don't know, maybe there's nobody to lie to anymore. Now you can be open about these things and simply say, for instance, I don't know, I guess we're not quite at the point where I've seen anybody defending the Border Patrol agents by invoking some sort of Blue Lives Matter type argument, but I guess we may just be days away from that one. That brings things back to the book there again. Another one of the themes of Obama being the cop hater and loving Black Lives Matter instead. And I guess there's a pretty strong relationship between that and the sixth chapter about illegal immigrants and the president who loved them.
I can give you all right. So let me give you an example on there. So in 2015, there was a terrible tragedy in San Francisco. It was a woman named Kate Steinle who was shot and killed by an undocumented immigrant. He had a criminal record. Trump was on the campaign trail at the time. This was not long after he had come down the escalator at Trump Tower and announced his campaign for president by talking about Mexican immigrants being rapists and drug dealers and killers. So he was all over the death of Kate Steinle. He attacked Obama and Democrats on immigration because of this. Limbaugh did the same thing, and he connected it to Black Lives Matter, right? So here's one of the things that Limbaugh did. So on July 7th, 2015, he said that Kate Steinle's name would, quote, never be as well known as Trayvon Martin, end quote, and that the president would not deliver the eulogy at her funeral. Now, this is even though Obama had actually, of course, not delivered the eulogy at Trayvon Martin's funeral. He hadn't spoken at any of the funerals of other Americans who were killed by police. That's not the point. Yeah,
what would that matter?
The point is that, and by the way, Obama did speak at the memorial service for the 5 Dallas police officers who were murdered a year later, in 2016, and that was connected to outrage. It was connected to a protest of police violence. But he did speak at those officers' funerals, but not at Trayvon Martin's funeral. But that doesn't matter, right? Limbaugh is basically going in there saying, look, Obama loves Trayvon Martin. He loves those black people, but a white lady, a blonde, I believe, white lady killed by an immigrant, he couldn't care less about them. And that's the kind of connection that Limbaugh and Trump made. He also talked about the immigration policies that in his argument led to Steinle's murder. And he said these policies were, quote, coming home to roost. Now, that may sound like a sort of a generic phrase, but for those who had been listening to Limbaugh or like me reading 8 years of Limbaugh show transcripts, you know what he's doing there. What he's doing there is he's evoking Reverend Jeremiah Wright. Reverend Jeremiah Wright was, he brought up Limbaugh brought up Wright and Obama hundreds of times.
Yes.
To evoke the idea that Obama was some kind of black radical like Jeremiah Wright, anti-American, anti-white, whatever. So again, and he brought up coming home to roost dozens of times. Even just that is a way for his audience to be reminded that, yes, here's another way Obama's an anti-white, radical, black nationalist, whatever. And then he also talked about Obama hating America and wanting to alter its, quote, composition, end quote, in order to change, quote, the face of the country, end quote. So there again is the larger point. Obama wants to make America browner, less white. He hates you. He likes them. All of this stuff. A couple of days later, he comes back at Obama over Kate Steinle. He says Obama, hasn't contacted the Steinle family, but on the other hand, he's written letters to 46 felons whose sentences Obama, commuted. And he also talked about Obama having reached out to the family of Michael Brown in Ferguson, who is central to the whole Black Lives Matter thing. Again, Limbaugh's audience is hearing that Obama cares more about prisoners, which of course is read as black and Hispanic people, and black people killed by cops, but doesn't care about the white woman murdered by an undocumented immigrant. And I said, if there's one segment that both encapsulates Limbaugh's tribalizing history of the Obama presidency and shows how his race-baiting rhetoric paved the way for the rise of Trump, this was it.
Yeah. Wow. It occurs to me that I did see Jeremiah Wright's name invoked just recently, too. I'll see if I can't dig that thing up. But I think maybe that's probably a great way of wrapping things up and reminding everybody of, the title of the book and its availability. And another great conversation. Thank you very much for coming by. I know this was a kind of a tough one today. Throw it a mix of immediate events and tying them to the book. But if it weren't the case that if your thesis wasn't so strong, you wouldn't be able to tie everything that's happening in daily life to everything you've laid out here. And I think that only makes the case for the book that much stronger. So I appreciate you being able to do that on your feet.
Well, thanks, and it's fun to be on your toes. So, yeah, I mean, it's the tribalization of politics, how Rush Limbaugh's race-baiting rhetoric on the Obama presidency paved the way for Trump, and folks can get it at Amazon or wherever else, online, or if you want to get in your car and drive to a bookstore, that's a little more of a risk. But there are plenty of ways to get the book. And really, thanks, David, for having me on. I always have a good time talking with you.
Thanks for giving us so much time for this one. And yeah, I'll be providing a link where you can buy the book direct from the publishers as well, right on our roundup today. And Scott will help us take care of that one. Thanks very much, Ian, and hope to speak with you again soon. Things will get crazier, I'm sure. And, we look forward to having your comment on them again.
You got it.
Thanks. Take care. And Ian Reifowitz, everyone. And look for him on Sunday. You have a piece coming up this Sunday or not this Sunday?
I do.
You do?
I do, and but I don't really I'm toying with a couple of ideas. It's a long way off.
Okay. All right. So we won't press you for that one. We'll wait for Sunday. It's only Tuesday. Give him a break. All right. Thanks. We'll have an eye out for it, Ian. Talk to you again soon.
Talk to you soon. Take care, David.
You do the same. All right. This has been it's been a hell of a day. Should we rate the call as excellent? I think so. A few more items that I think we ought to toss into the mix to set up the rest of the week. Where did I see that comment? I'm pretty sure I had seen somebody making a point about, the ridiculousness of various things that Trump was doing that we were somehow ignoring, and yet, I guess, comparing it to the outrage over the mere mention of Jeremiah Wright's name way back when. But I'll see if I can't find that one, just to sort of remind myself of what that was about. Anyway, events that we'll have to discuss in the coming days. Tomorrow, of course, being Wednesday, we'll expect to have Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter with us for discussion of these things. It'll be July 3rd, and about time to see the horror unveiled. We'll see exactly how military the whole parade gets. There are a few other things in the offing. I believe the New York Times has some coverage over, I guess, of not only the tanks arriving, but I saw Daniel Dresner highlighting something from the Times reporting on it. Remember, of course, that there's going to be flyovers with not only the Navy's Blue Angels and one of the Air Force One planes, but apparently aircraft from each of the services will fly overhead. And Trump envisions this happening, I guess, around the time of his speech, or maybe has been integrated into as part of his speech. The New York Times reporting is that Mr. Trump, who is to speak at the celebration, has requested that the chiefs for the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines stand next to him as aircraft from each of their services fly overhead and their respective hymns play on loudspeakers. So about as jingoistic as you could possibly make it, and about as clear a politicization of the various service branches as you could possibly make. Ordinarily, you would say one giant Hatch Act violation, except for the fact that, one, there is no such thing anymore, and two, arguably, the president is immune from it because he's got a carve-out in the Hatch Act. But, of course, it would be, he's asking for a violation of the Hatch Act from each of the chiefs of the various services as well. This thing, I think, as it happens, it's unfolding before our very eyes, and we know exactly what's going on here, and that it will be a gigantic grift. But what can we do? We're just watching it unfold in slow motion, and there's nothing that our current legal system puts at our disposal to stop it. So we just kind of have to sit there and watch it happen. Huffington Post reporting things are getting worse and worse. Basically, as time goes on, we're finding out more and more in the way of departure from regular order, if you will. RNC giving out tickets to Trump's hijacked 4th of July celebration is how SV Date's piece in HuffPost is titled. What had been a non-political, non-partisan celebration on a national mall, that is to say the usual a capital 4th, right, will now be likely a multi-million-dollar taxpayer-financed political rally, critics worry, but critics are right. That's the thing. So in the headliner, it says RNC is giving out the tickets. They will, of course, say, they already have told the press, well, the tickets are free, and so therefore there can't be any corruption connected with them. I'm sure the tickets themselves are free. How the RNC will be distributing them is the big question, aside from the question of why is the RNC distributing them at all? Remember, what you're replacing is a long-standing nonpartisan and very carefully maintained as nonpartisan celebration of the 4th of July, which he is changing into something else. Now he's calling it a celebration. What is it? A salute to America. You got to have a new name for it. But he has this VIP ticketed area. The tickets will be free, but they'll be distributed by the Republican National Committee. How could that possibly be allowed? And the answer is it can't, but no one can figure out how to put a legal stop to it before July 4th, and what would it matter anyway? Suppose you got a ruling from the Supreme Court that it was totally illegal, so what? Donald Trump goes ahead and does it anyway. The RNC giving out free tickets probably on the basis of something that's completely not free. I imagine they will be going to large donors. Although I did see Mark Schmidt, I think, arguing yesterday that it might result in a rather sparse crowd, as the people who tend to be the biggest donors to the RNC likely have their own July 4th plans already. This is pretty short notice to be showing up for a command performance for Donald Trump, but I don't think they care whether or not those seats are filled. They'll find seat fillers, I'm sure, and make it look like the crowd is there, and they don't really care whether the donors show up. They just care that the donors feel rewarded. So free tickets to people who give you $1 million isn't really a free ticket. SV Date's actual reporting here, we can fit a little bit of this in here before we take off. Donald Trump has hijacked what for decades has been a non-political Independence Day celebration on the National Mall. And of course it would be non-political because all Americans are interested in July 4th, regardless of who they vote for, but that's not how Republicans see it. Anyway, so he'll be packing his ticketed event speech with political appointees and Republican donors. The Republican National Committee has been offering major donors tickets to Trump's speech, as have political appointees at the White House and executive branch agencies. All totally improper, of course, but what are you going to do? How will you stop it? You won't. He's going to have tanks out there. It's going to be cool, joked one RNC fundraiser on condition of anonymity. He said he received an offer for the free tickets on Friday, but did not request any. He wants to have a parade like they have in Moscow or China or North Korea. Used to be that Republicans would not think it would be cool to have a parade like they do in Moscow, China, or North Korea. But as Ian told you, all of that is out the window now. Principles gone. I don't know whether, well, maybe we'll discuss the particulars of this tomorrow, because this will just eat up the rest of the few minutes that we've got to run through S.V. Date's excellent rundown of what's happening. Just sort of wanted to let you know that, as predicted, yes, I guess if we had just gone by the reporting yesterday, you would have been stuck saying, well, I'm not certain that this really can turn into a huge grift, because they do say the tickets are free. It required zero imagination to figure out how, quote-unquote, free tickets could be turned into a gigantic grift. That's what we're here for. You got to read between the lines, and for whatever reason, most, mainstream journalists just aren't allowed to do that. They probably know very well, in many cases, exactly what's going on, just feel like they are restrained from saying so for whatever reason. We'll also, of course, I'm sure have to put some discussion forward of what's going on in Congress, and that will entail our voicing our considerable disappointment in what's been going on and what's not been going on in the House of Representatives under Speaker Pelosi, who appears less and less each day to have a secret plan to make things work really well and in satisfying ways for the rest of us. Of course, we'll be dealing with the New York Times headline, House passes Senate border bill in striking defeat for Pelosi, and we can talk about the political dynamics that led to that happening. And I guess what you should keep in mind when we discuss that one, although maybe we should have saved it for tomorrow, is it's a striking defeat for Pelosi and progressives in the House who were forced by conservative Democrats in the House to cave in. But again, we were supposed to have a master plan for all of this, and I guess we don't. And then, of course, the Huffington Post's reporting Arthur Delaney on this one, Democrats in no hurry to get Trump's tax returns. We might have to force Armando to wait for Thursday for a discussion of that one, or Friday, so that he can chime in and rant appropriately. But Arthur reminding us we are 6 months into Democratic control of the House, and they still haven't filed suit over the president's secret tax returns. We won the right to do it, but we just haven't because something. And there's some strategy involved here, yes. And an idea of shifting the burden. There really was a rather remarkable and almost brilliant idea of trying to salvage congressional ability to get someone held in contempt, even if they don't do it themselves, by shifting the burden of contempt to the courts, who are recognized by most people as having that power. But you got to file the lawsuit in order to do that. And golly, that hasn't happened yet. And we don't really know why, except, we can imagine reasons, and we'll perhaps speculate a little bit on that tomorrow and perhaps into Thursday and Friday along with Armando as well. And, I guess we draw closer as well to getting testimony from Robert Mueller. And we'll be discussing that one, and a couple of reporters have been theorizing, and a couple of opinion writers as well, Greg Sargent among them. I think discussion of Republican strategy for the upcoming testimony, and whether or not it will backfire against Republicans. And we can, I guess, always hope for that. Plus, much more coming up in the rest of the week. Speaking of some of the shortcomings of our mainstream media First Amendment, what was I saying? First Amendment reportage. We'll discuss, hopefully sometime later in the week, along with Peace Arena, who has recorded this segment for us, the hidden costs of losing your city's newspaper and the expanding news desert, two pieces from which she has drawn in recording this piece for us that we can hopefully get to a little bit later in the week for some broader theoretical discussion. In the meantime, time to wrap things up here in stumbling fashion as we exit from today's show and enter into Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next. What's on tap? You know, he's been doing a good job shortening these blurbs. Let's see if we can't return the favor by fitting it all in here. Texas Republicans passed a law to hide evidence of their illegal power grabs, not far removed from what we've been discussing earlier today. Oh, and I missed this one here. Nobody deserves to be ripped to shreds more than Trump and his son-in-law Jared Kushner, so John Oliver does the good deed for all of us, as he does weekly. More here to come on the show. Jackie Rosen, the U.S. Democratic Senator of Nevada, Jackie Rosen, announced she would block 2 of Trump's nominees for positions in DHS over the horrendous conditions for kids in his concentration camps. About time. And former National Security Advisor Susan Rice called Trump's lie about Obama and North Korea horse manure, let's say, but using the S word.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
More to come, of course, on the second half of his show. Russia called on Trump to agree to a prisoner swap or else. So I guess he's getting that one. And it is especially perverse, in quote marks, for Harvard to hire toxic people like Rick Snyder in the name of civility. Yes, that's actually happening. All that and more next.